Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. We're now getting started with plenary session 2. As I mentioned earlier, the European way to climate neutral smart cities. Will this work? So what we will be discussing during this panel really is the European way to smart cities. What does that mean? Is there one? And what are some of the characteristics there? We're also looking into the challenges, and here would like to get your perspectives as well. So we'll open the floor there for some of your comments into the chat on those challenges that European cities are currently facing. We heard Georg earlier on in the intermezzo give a few of his ideas there. We're looking at challenges, but also those inspiring solutions. What's working and what has an impact already. And then we'll take it to how do we really go about designing and creating those solutions? What's the process? What are the secret ingredients? And also, what's the role of data in particular in building those solutions? And then finally, how can we really drive these open and urban innovation systems where new challenges are continuously being met with new solutions? How do we get that ecosystem of stakeholders collaborating with each other? We have four excellent panelists lined up for you, so I'll quickly introduce them. First, we have Eddie Hartog. He is head of unit at Technologies for Smart Communities at DG Connect. Then we have Kari Nessa Nortun, the mayor of Stavanger in Norway, so bringing in the city perspective here. We have Pirjo Jantunen. She is business development manager at Helen, Finland, so bringing in the business perspective here. And then finally, we have Joachim Dugenio. He is senior expert working at the Directorate for Quality of Life at DG Environment, and he's one of the point persons, if I may, on the Zero Pollution Action Plan. So we're not just talking about climate neutral solutions, we would also like to broaden up that scope as well. How can we really design those integrated solutions that were mentioned in the first plenary session? So we'll try to take that on as well during our panel. I'd like to bring in each of our panelists just to give a quick intro to our panel, introducing who they are more in depth and what they are working on. So Eddie, on that note, can I ask you to take the floor, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, first of all, for having me. So my name is Eddie Hartog. I'm the head of unit indeed for what we call technologies for smart communities. And the reason why I mentioned that is for two reasons. One is we approach it through the technology angle. That's why we are in DG Connect, but there are many other angles as we have seen in today's forum. And secondly, we refer more to communities than to cities, also to bring along those sort of smaller municipal entities that are not considered to be cities. I mean, one of the members of our movement has 6,000 inhabitants, and it's important that we also bring them along.
Excellent, thank you, Eddie. So it's really an inclusive definition of cities. It's not just the big ones, it's the small ones, the municipalities. And that's actually a great segue for Kari, just to give her perspective and just to give an introduction about what she's doing, what she's working on. Please, Kari.
Thank you so much, Stefan, and thank you so much for this opportunity to participate in this debate and share some thoughts and ideas from a Stavanger perspective. I've been a mayor since October 2019 in Stavanger, and prior to the election, I served for 8 years in Stavanger Municipal Council, and I was a member of the Municipal Executive Presidency since 2013. I have a law degree from the University of Bergen, and I also studied European law in Brussels, so it's so good to see some of you guys here. Since March 2020, there has been a lot of work related to COVID-19. So as the situation continues to improve, touch wood, I really look forward to the reopening of the society and to embark on existing tasks and projects in our city. Stavanger is known to be Norway's energy capital, and as a mayor, I'm dedicated to the further development of renewable energy sector, new technology, climate issues, and green urban development. Stavanger is a pocket-sized metropole with inhabitants from more than 180 countries and has a strong tradition for cooperation between sectors. We experienced a severe economic dip just around the years 2014 and 2015, when the fall of the oil price resulted in high unemployment rates. This happened around the same time as the Paris Agreement was signed, and for us in Stavanger, it was a final wake-up call to truly start working towards climate-friendly solutions using the competence we have built through 5 decades in oil and gas. Since then, during the 6-7.5 years, a lot has happened. Stavanger has participated in several European projects to gain and share competence for smarter solutions. Stavanger was the first city in Norway to establish its own smart city department, and we have hosting the Nordic Edge, which is Norway's official innovation cluster from smart cities and communities. So finally, just want to say we have strong ambitions for the green development and aim to become one of the 100 climate neutral cities in Europe. And we hope this will further our good relationship with the EU. Thank you so much. I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you so much, Kari. And you joined, you became a mayor rather in the end of 2019. I'd be curious to hear sort of that tumultuous time that you experienced and some of the challenges that came from there. I'd love to get into that later during the panel there as well. Pirjo, could I ask you to just give a quick introduction, who you are, what you're working on, what inspires you, maybe some childhood dreams that you can bring in, just following on the trend of the previous panel, please.
Hey, great to be here. My name is Pirjo Juntunen. I work as business development manager at Helen, which is energy utility owned by the city of Helsinki. And our vision as a company is to be the most custom-centered energy company in the market and bring the possibilities of new energy era accessible to all. So I think the concept of smart solutions and smart city is really core in the company's vision. And we aim to grow rapidly in the field of solar, wind, e-mobility, and smart buildings. And about my role, I work in the smart buildings unit. So we are developing solutions to support energy efficiency in buildings, for example, heating optimization and building specific heating solutions. So I think what would be my viewpoint in this session is to think how we as a utility can drive innovation and support smart cities in the development, not alone, but in collaboration of all parties.
Yeah, and I do like that point about customer centricity. So also let's look into how do we design those solutions with the customers, and then the question becomes, who are those customers, right? Last but not least, we have Joachim from DG Envy. Joachim, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello. Good morning, everybody, and great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me. I think it's really great to be following on the first panel. It was very inspiring, and they covered a lot of ground and made my job very easy because they already explained a lot of things that we have been doing recently. So specifically to my role in DG Environment, I was part of a team developing the, as you mentioned, the Zero Pollution Action Plan for air, water, and soil. And it's really the last piece in the jigsaw of the European Green Deal. So we had a lot of strategies over the last year. And this was the one that was missing from the original announcement. And it's very much a strategy that looks at human health. It's how can we improve human health and quality of life. It looks at biodiversity and the pollution effects on biodiversity and ecosystems. And it looks at sustainable production and consumption. And I think the whole narrative of the action plan is picking up on the narrative of the European Green Deal, which was so much already elaborated by the earlier speakers in panel one and by the colleagues here. It's about linking up the dots. I mean, climate neutrality is the headline challenge, is the headline ambition that we all embrace. And with that comes so many other opportunities that can be co-benefits that we can connect together and make sure that our investments pay twice or three times over. And in that respect, I think the points are made about integration, co-creation, etc. were really things that I would have said in my introduction as well. Makes my life easy. But I want to finish on just one particular aspect that we have been focusing on, and very much in the spirit of co-creation, because it was an initiative that was done jointly and very closely together with DG Connect, and actually Eddie's team was very much involved, and many other DGs in the house. We basically developed a specific paper on digital solutions for zero pollution. And in that paper, you see a panoply of ideas and suggestions and examples. And I know by far we have not mentioned all of them, but it's really in the spirit of the session. It's about showcasing there are these solutions already there. It requires technological innovation, it requires ingenuity, but it requires people, and it requires enthusiasm that people get on board and use these solutions for a purpose. And that's my main message. I mean, we're doing all this for a purpose. So smart in itself is not a purpose. The purpose is that with smartness, we want to become better in cities. I think one of the speakers earlier said, provide better services, have a better quality of life, a better economy, better well-being overall. And I think that's really for me the key of bringing all these dots together. And I'm really glad to be here and join that discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Joachim. And again, I think it's another point here to really go to our Slido about the purpose of a smart city, because we really want to see the breadth of those ideas. So what is a smart city building towards? Smart is not a goal in and of itself. It can perhaps be the means, but what is that purpose, that raison d'être for a smart city? I'd like to encroach really on our first big topic, as alluded to in the title, the European way to smart cities. So I'd just like to have a few comments from our panelists. When you hear the European way to smart cities, what does that mean to you, and how does that fit with the work that you're doing? Kari, you're the mayor of Stavanger. Obviously, that's a European city, but what does that mean to you? Any specific recipes that you're looking at, please?
The city of Stavanger's vision is smart together. As part of being a smart city, we emphasize the citizen involvement through an open process. In the Nordic Edge, as I referred to earlier, they call it smart with a heart. And it's based on a fundamental idea that we need citizen-centric approach in order to truly become a smart city. The driving force behind the development isn't necessarily technology, but collaboration, co-creation, and business development is very important. And it's the cooperative spirit is we emphasize in Stavanger. It's our most crucial resource when we work together with developing a new industry and commerce and giving the citizens and inhabitants a better, more comfortable everyday life. That is really what it's all about, and what many of you already also say.
It's so interesting to hear, Kari, how you are having that collaborative approach on different scales. So it's not just Stavanger and your citizens, but also through Nordic Edge as well. And then you're also working with industry more specifically. I want to take it to you, Eddie. You're working on, again, tech for smart communities. Again, it's that inclusive dimension here. Well, what's the European recipe here? What's the secret sauce? Is there any specific angle that you have to this question based on the work that you're doing?
Yeah, there's certainly no secret thoughts. We try to be as open and transparent as we can. But maybe to take you through the conversation, I mentioned that I work on the technology part. So we worked on urban data platforms, urban digital platforms, and a lot of technical stuff that you need to be able to lay the foundation of your house, basically, if you build a house. And then when you talk politically, and now Kari, I'm sure, is the exception, but most mayors will not like me talking about standards and interoperability and that sort of stuff, because it's not really what they're interested in. They're interested in the services in the end that you provide. In order to provide those services, you need something in between. And I think where you found the common ground is when you talk about the management of data, because that is political, because the choices to be made. It's technical. That's where the interoperability comes in, and it has that sort of output that in the end you need. And that is really where through the data governance structure that we started having a conversation with cities. say immediately that as a European Union, we have a strong data policy, we did a strategy, we have legislation, we have financial instruments. We talk about the Open Data Directive. We now have the Data Governance Act, where it's all about how can you share this data in a trusted environment. And that's also immediately the European way that comes in, because we need that, because so far we don't have that fully trusted environment. And also, how can you then bring about this data altruism, which actually exists in a lot of organizations? And that is where I felt that the conversation resonates. But we stay atomized, and if you want to have the strength of the power, you need the collective action to do so. Because take a very simple example to discuss data access and use with Google or Booking.com or Line for the scooters is even for the mayor of Stavanger very difficult, because you don't have the leverage. They say, well, if you don't want us, then we'll go somewhere else, and then your citizens can play. If you do that collectively, you stand much stronger, and that is where this movement of the Living in .eu movement was actually born, where European Union mayor said, no, we need to do this together in a way that we have it. Now, it's not very different from what I see in other parts of the world. I mean, working from these data platforms to the local digital twins, again, it's this visualization of what you can do with the cities. And if you have a virtual reality digital twin, look at what you can do with citizens engagement, for example, which has come up already this morning a couple of occasions. You see that in Australia, where they have a number of initiatives. The United Kingdom has a strong national data strategy. All of that, you see that throughout the world. And it's really that European way that we have tried to bring in, where citizen-centric was mentioned, but also respect of privacy, making sure that there's a full ecosystem. It's not dominated either by the government, because we know governments that are quite intrusive in terms of using data towards its citizens. It's not dominated by large tech companies. And so finding that balance in a way becomes the European way. And now we pride ourselves in the European Union that often leads to global conversations as well. But we've seen that this resonates also with the G20, with countries like Japan and South Korea, for example. So that is really what we're trying to do around those local data platforms and those local data twins to bring the European Union together. Just visualize yourself a European network of local digital twins and the power that gives us to make better decisions for our citizens.
Thank you, Eddie. So it's really those enabling conditions that you're building through data. And again, certainly no secret sauce, because you're trying to be as transparent as possible. Also really like your point about those living labs, because I think it links nicely also with the first panel session, where they really talked about this learning approach. How can we learn from each other, and how can we reflect on things that work well and things that work less well? Thank you so much. Pirjo, could I ask you to give us some insights, the European way to smart cities? You work with city ecosystems at large. You work with the city of Helsinki. Is that inherently European? What's your perspective here?
Yeah, I think my perspective is like local, from Helsinki, from a European city, and what you said about smart not being a goal but a means. I think that's really well said. Helsinki says that in Helsinki it's the most functional city in the world. That here you have 25 hours per day because everything works. And in order to reach that, you need a lot of smart solutions. And what's the ultimate goal? Marketing people saying 25 hours per day. It's that people can have easy, happy living. It's well-being, it's not much emissions, and so on. So everything works. Of course, you shouldn't believe in marketing people, but I think there's a hint of truth as well in that claim. And as an energy utility, we try to support the city to reach these targets. Keep the city running, buildings warm, lights on, and introduce smart services to make the city and energy system and people's living even more optimized.
Thank you, Pirjo. I think what really underlines, or what lies underneath, though, that slogan 24 hours per day is you need to give those material benefits to citizens. It's really about, delivering. The lights need to be on, the heating needs to be there. So delivering to citizens, I think here's a key message. Joachim, could I ask you to take the floor? European way to smart cities from DG Environment, and you working on zero pollution. Is that inherently European? What's your take on that?
Well, it's not inherently European. I think it's something that we can all embrace, and I think it's a choice that humanity has to make. I think we're at a crossroads. All people on Earth, we have just gone through a very terrible period, and we have a decade which counts now. We have to make choices that have an impact for far longer than just the immediate future generations. Climate change, I think all these things make it a challenge that we all must embrace, and we all need to learn from each other in the EU, in Europe, in other parts of the world. And I think there's lots to learn from each other. And I just want to pick up two things that were mentioned earlier. I think one thing is really, it's about people. It's about bringing people together and using the power of people and making them inspired, making it a positive experience. And Eddie has mentioned the living labs. I think that's one of the things that we are also promoting now in the Zero Pollution Action Plan, is really to have use cases, to have others translating these big ideas and these let's say overarching strategies that we have in the European Green Deal at the European level into the local and regional context. I mean, that's where it really happens. And that's really what I think is now the next really big thing we have to focus on. And the second thing I want to say, we have to be inclusive. I mean, we are talking about a multiple set of challenges. And to give you an example on the climate neutrality, as I said earlier, it's the headline challenge we have to embrace. But of course, for people, if I take myself, and it's a hypothetical example because I've never used the car, but if I were to switch from the car to take the bicycle today to go to the office, if I decide that because I think I want to contribute to the climate neutrality of Brussels in 2030 or 2050, whatever we decide here in Brussels, well, it's quite a bit off. It's quite some time, and I make a very small contribution to something very big, and I feel probably like a little sand grain on the beach, I mean, like something I can do something, but I will not change the world. But if I go on my bicycle today, the air quality improves immediately, my health improves immediately, and I have ultimately a more satisfactory experience at the end of the day, in particular because it's sunny, because I did something that also contributes to climate neutrality. So we have to see this together. It's not about either or, it's about bringing people into changing our lives in a way that we are all better off. And I think that doesn't happen through technology alone, but technology can be a wonderful tool that helps us to transform that, with all the interaction that we can create and with all the satisfaction that we can track. Then how much cycling did I do today? How much carbon did I probably save or something like that. So I think for me, this bringing these things together is really the key now, because we have to translate from the big ideas to the actions on the ground. And that's where cities and communities are so important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joachim. And I think there's some inspiring solutions that are already being implemented right now that really empowers citizens to take those steps themselves, and also to really go from those individual actions to really scale and make them really impactful and build towards those climate neutral cities. Quick note, I see Ariadne posting. So indeed, all sessions will be recorded, so there's no fear of missing out. That also applies to the parallel sessions during the rest of the day. So you'll be able to watch those at your own leisure. Also, similarly, we want to get your perspectives in here. So as Ariadne posted in the chat, we really want you to come up to tell us what you think are the biggest challenges that European cities are facing right now. And I emphasize the right now. So please use the chat function. Please write no more than 2 words. It's difficult for me and the other panelists to go through. But please write no more than 2 words in the chat function. What is the biggest challenge you think that European cities are facing right now? And we'll take those points on and have our panelists comment on it. So please use the chat function. While we're doing this, I have a question for you, Kari. So you mentioned before Stavanger is an energy capital. In the past, it's been referred to as the oil capital of Norway. At the same time, you have very ambitious climate goals for 2030 and 2040. So is there a contradiction here, or how does that translate that history of an oil capital into challenges, but perhaps also very much opportunities? Please.
Thank you. That's a very good question. Business, as you say, business and industries in our region has been largely linked to the production of oil and gas for the last 50 years. And as you say, the council here has adopted ambitious strategies for climate goals and sustainable business development. And this is very important for us because we see that is absolutely necessary in the time we live in now. And our city and our region has been built up a lot of resilience through several periods of challenging economic times throughout the past 100 and 200 years. And turning challenges into opportunities has been one of our biggest strengths. We have a history of successful transmissions, and we have already managed to start the shift from oil and gas into energy capital. Our strongest card is, I think, in the knowledge of our citizens, what competence is within them, as well as our natural resources. So we're lucky there. We find that we have excellent conditions and capacity for new business development because we build on the unique competence of our citizens and an industry that is experts on big data analysis, and remote operations. So this combination provides a fertile ground for us for many new companies in renewable energy, but also artificial intelligence and sensory science. So this is important. So we are already hosting innovation clusters, for example, with health tech, aquaculture, and renewable energy. And the development is going very, very fast, maybe faster than ever before. So we have also an example with Pumps and Pipes, an initiative that fosters knowledge exchange from oil and gas to the health sector. So there's a lot of competence that can be used in different sectors, and that transmission is happening very, very fast as we speak. So look right to the future, but it's a big task, and it will not be as a good economy as the oil and gas, but we need a more diversity and meet the challenges ahead, like the climate crisis.
Yeah. Thank you, Kari. I think it's also what Commissioner Sampson also mentioned earlier this morning, is how do we really transition from fossil fuels and make cities fit for the 21st century. Very great, very good point. Thank you so much for putting in your perspectives in the chat. We have quite a bit, actually, so I'll try to do my best to just recap, and then I'll ask our panelists to come in. And poverty, so it's both the environmental aspect and the social aspect, really relating to those inclusive solutions that we want to build. Han writes, get complex urban projects finance ready. Very much what Georg mentioned earlier is the finance. Finance is the biggest challenge. How do we finance all those projects? Social inequality, again, strong social dimension. And then we have climate change, and of course that is a split into climate change mitigation. But also we have what someone else calls the climate catastrophe as the biggest challenge. How can we look at climate change adaptation, those urban heat islands and other impacts coming from increased climate change? How can we tackle those? We have a point here about actions efficiency as well. Perhaps links nicely what we heard from Helsinki's slogan. How can we, make these efficient and impact these solutions efficient and impactful? The climate neutrality, of course, that's a longer-term goal. We have renovation costs, smart decisions. Finally, we have to start sometimes with the small ones that have a big impact. And finally, efficiency in climate change mitigation. A whole bunch of different perspectives. Really good to see that breadth. If I can ask you, Eddie, you mentioned digital twins earlier, sort of those digital avatars for cities. Could you just explain how you see those digital twins really help tackle some of those complex challenges that I just riffed through, please?
Yeah, no, I'm going to start with something I did before, which was the self-driving car, which is part of also a smart city, but start with a car and then in the context of climate change, everyone says, no cars. But if you look at the car differently, apart from the mobility element from A to B, it's also going to be a battery in the city context. So it's going to help with energy. It's going to, by moving around, give you all sorts of information on environmental reporting because it can measure a lot of things while moving. It's going to be actually your workplace, which means you will not be just sitting in the car, you'll be working in a self-driving car. So if you picture that, your way of looking at things becomes different. Now, if you want to picture that, it's clear that the functionalities are actually getting blurred. And you can't really separate the energy sector anymore from the mobility sector, from the building sector, which is what we still do. I mean, we have all organized, including the European Commission, in those sort of sectors. And that is also where this idea of smart cities with a purpose comes from. It's not like we're doing smart cities to enjoy ourselves, to have, coming from a digital director general, everything digital is fine. Now, it's also costly because there's data centers and there's things that you need to look at. But it's cross-sectoral, brings the data together. And if you then visualize that in a local digital twin, you get a number of things. You get, first of all, you get this visualization that I already mentioned, and that's also why we see it as very relevant for the Bauhaus initiative that President von der Leyen launched. In this co-creation, environmentally friendly, you can do that. But you can only make it relevant because you can do modeling. You can say, well, if I place a house from north to south instead of from east to west, or put the road differently, this is the effect it will have on mobility and on emissions, etc. You can play around with it. Now, I think, Kari, you wouldn't be sort of saying, oh, let's just try an area of a city like this, and if it doesn't work, we'll flatten it and we'll build a new city. Now, but with the modeling, you can actually do that. You can bring in the real-time information in managing the city, managing mobilities, not just statistics, and you can actually bring on board people that might find it difficult to come to physical meetings. And now, of course, you'll immediately create a digital divide that people are hesitant on the digital side. So that's something you need to overcome. And that is where we think that local digital twins mixed with the right local data platforms, in the end, artificial intelligence to help you with your decisions, not take the decisions for you. We think that a network of European local digital twins will actually help us individually to steer our environments much better for the purposes that we have just expressed. And also I see in the chat a number of those reflections also from Paul now on the emergency plans. You can visualize it, you can model it, you can actually anticipate it and test it. And all those sort of things help with local digital twins without doing a lot of damage in the meantime.
Great, thank you so much, Eddie. And indeed, great that you're already picking up on some of the chats here as well. Someone else commented, sustainable and affordable housing is a key challenge. And perhaps when we're looking at some of those inspiring solutions that are out there, just in a second, I'll try to get your perspective on this, Piero, because you are working on quite a range of exciting projects that deal specifically with housing. I still want to bring in you here, Joachim, because I think, Eddie, you made an interesting point about sort of, we've been working in the confines of our rooms and houses the past few months. And in the future, we might be working in these electric vehicles. Now, they also come with their own environmental impact, and that's why we have the European Batteries Alliance, the European Raw Materials Alliance, that really look at making those value chains and the extraction of those resources more sustainable. Joachim, earlier when you introduced the Zero Pollution Action Plan, that's something that you're also looking at, so sustainable production, sustainable value chains. When we combine this with challenges that cities are facing now, what's the immediate urgency when it comes to the pollution aspect? 2050, the zero pollution vision might seem far off, what is for you the urgency when it comes to pollution, the short-term actions we should be looking at?
Yeah, there's a lot of it in there, but I do like the idea from Eddie that we're moving from home office to car office. So that's at least a progression, hopefully sometime in the future. Well, two parts. I mean, if you look at the urban context, I think we all know that air and noise pollution is something that is a lot still a problem. That is, it's something that affects us, that we experience in some places on a daily basis. So I think that I would see as an immediate pollution-related issue. You were alluding more to the, let's say, the wider question how we live our lives, our sustainable consumption and production. And here, I think what I want to underline is, I mean, first of all, you know that we're aiming also for a clean and circular economy that is climate neutral. So that's part and parcel of this whole idea. And I think what is really important for us to remember is that the choices we make locally have a huge effect globally as well. I mean, the way we choose certain solutions to apply them in our context, in our daily lives, whether as a consumer, whether as a municipality, etc., they will have a footprint. They will have a footprint somewhere. And we need to bring, which we already do since many, many decades when we talked about sustainability, where we say is think globally, act locally. We need to bring these dimensions even closer together than a lot of people do. There are some wonderful projects in some cities which define the way they want to live in, not only locally in terms of well-being, social dimension, very important, and the environmental dimension, but also what the choices they make locally means for societies around the world. Where do we get our raw materials from? How do we rely on food? For example, food is a big question. How do we rely on raw materials, as you mentioned? So I think that's a really interesting challenge, and a lot of people more and more want to be making a positive contribution, not only in the neighborhood, but also to the societies elsewhere in the world. I mean, we care about the farmers elsewhere who produce our coffee, chocolate, whatever it is, or about the mining workers who provide us the raw materials that we have a smartphone in our city. So all of that is connected. That's the beauty about the Green Deal, is that we raise this awareness. And let me finish by highlighting one point that I find really important, that is, and many people in the chat have commented on. I think the Green Deal is not an environmental agenda. The Green Deal is an agenda that looks at the economic, social, and environmental dimensions in an integrity, exactly how our lives are. We are not only human beings, social beings, economic beings, or enjoying the environment. We are all of that together. And the social dimension, the just transition, is at the heart of the European Green Deal. And I must say personally, I mean, I'm an engineer by training, when working for more than 20 years on pollution, but it was really, really inspiring for me. I learned a lot. That in the preparation of the Zero Pollution Action Plan, we have had a lot of discussions with our colleagues on the employment side, on the just transition side, on looking a little bit, how does pollution actually affect the vulnerable parts of our societies? With lower income, elderly people, children. And what can we do about it? The awareness is there now. Now we have to translate it into concrete solutions and make this transition a giant.
Great, thank you, Joachim. And I think it's a great way to get into sort of our next topic. So let's look at some of those local choices, those local solutions that are already being implemented throughout Europe. Perhaps, Pirjo, again, as I mentioned earlier, you're very much working with city stakeholders in the city ecosystem in co-creating those solutions. Someone mentioned earlier, again, sustainable and affordable housing. Is there any particular project that you find particularly interesting that you could just showcase to us?
Sure, there is. We know that buildings are responsible of 40% of energy consumption and almost 40% of greenhouse gas emissions in EU, and that in EU around 3/4 of building stock is energy efficient. And what we read from the chat, what is really pressing people, what are really important challenges is climate crisis, and then there was building renovation and social injustice. So I think this project, I'm going to tell you about kind of combines all these. And so buildings are really important in cities when it comes to climate crisis, energy consumption, and especially in Nordic countries, heating is really big. So it's really crucial what we do in the buildings and what we do with the heating. So we started to think about the solution to this heat consumption and maybe imbalanced heating inside buildings with the housing company of the city. And we create a solution to optimize the heating in the building. So in practice, we install sensors to apartments that measure temperature and moisture. And based on that information, combine that to the information about outside temperature. Based on that information, we can optimize the heating in the building so that it's not overheated or underheated, and thus create better living conditions for people living in the building and also energy savings. So with the housing company of the city, they had a goal to decrease the heating consumption by 2%. But we achieved the goal, and we in total decreased consumption 4.6%. So it was rather huge, and in some buildings it was even 14%. So there were also big differences, and we also piloted heat demand response with them. And as a solution, the city's housing company, they have altogether 50,000 apartments, almost 100,000 people living in their buildings. So every 7th people in Helsinki live in their buildings, and they have had this system running from 2018. So it's not just a pilot project or something small, but it's already scaled up, and it's saving energy every day.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Priyo. And let's also just in the next part focus on how do you scale up those kind of solutions. And really, so you have 5% on average, and some buildings even to 14%, and it's, you know, you're saving on heating, and it improves the well-being and the quality of living of people living in those buildings. I think again that's sort of the dual benefits here. Joachim, I think I saw you also put in the chat the documents about those digital solutions for zero pollution. I invite everyone to have a look at this document, and it's a portfolio of different types of solutions. Joachim, from your perspective, is there anyone that you could sort of pick out and give us a showcase on, linking it to some of the points that people have put in the chat, please?
Well, I think the idea of the paper was really to inspire, and there's a very big diversity of examples in there, and we know this is only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we know there are so many more that exist, and they range from examples like the digital twins that Eddie has already mentioned, to citizens engagement projects, to water companies using digital technologies. Or transport solutions that we've heard about already. And the idea is really not to basically say this is all exists and we all have the solutions in place. The idea is to say this could be a starting point to ask people to think more about more solutions and new innovations. You have to, on one hand, I think, never stop, because there's so much more out there that we don't even know yet, that we haven't even thought about. And secondly, you have to tailor-make these solutions to the context that you operate in. I mean, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. That's the other message that I think we wanted to give. It's not that in Brussels we will decide on all the best solutions that will be basically be the right ones to have efficient climate and environmental results. So it's really more meant as an inspiration, as a starter, as an appetizer, I would call it. For people to think of their own solutions and to look maybe somewhere and say, oh, this sounds interesting, but I would do it differently and I would develop it further. And of course, we in the European Commission, we can play our role. We, of course, want to support this. There is now a lot of investment ongoing. I think that's really important, not only in the recovery and resilience funds that member states are now finalizing, but of course, there are plenty of financing instruments. And they can help to develop these ideas. Your research and innovation is, for instance, another one. And one message that I wanted to really pass on from that paper, the lessons learned that we had a little bit from the paper, is that you should not disconnect the digital from the purpose. I mean, every project nowadays has some form of digital component. Yeah, whether it's an environment project, a transport project, an energy project, it has a digital component. I can't see anybody doing this with pen and paper, for example. I mean, so think of it digital and green together. That's, I think, a message we constantly keep saying. Our president, our commissioners on a political level, but I think also we in the services have really made a lot of progress in the discussions that we had on between us working together. Is thinking together. It's a green and digital transition. It will happen. I mean, there's no way stopping it, but we need to embrace it together, because if we separate the two from each other, we risk creating wonderful digital tools that don't create the purpose we want, or we have a purpose, but we don't achieve it as efficiently as we could do. And so really for me, that's maybe the main message is think digital and green together and make the most out of it, because there's a lot of inspiration and a lot of ingenuity in this. Thank you.
Thanks, Joachim. And it's that dual transition also that the commissioner talked about this morning. Also, your point about sort of innovation never stops, I think, is a great way to go into our next part, is looking at the methodology and the process. How can we really create these urban innovation systems? And I'd like to bring it to you, Kari, because you're mayor of Stavanger, but you're also connected with other regions. You're also connected in the broader Scandinavian region as well. So quite a unique ecosystem, again, that operates at different scales. Could you just give us a flavor of with who do you talk to? How do you engage with your key stakeholders? And also, very importantly, how do you actually encourage initiative and innovation in this ecosystem? If I could get your perspective here, please.
It's a big question. So I should have a day on to talk about this, but I will try to keep it short. As you say, we work very closely here with our stakeholders and researchers through our research network for smart cities at the university. And we work closely with residents, municipalities, voluntary organizations, that's also important, and the business community. We have a high focus on the latter, the business community, through a project we have called Quick Test. That's where we test and experiment with the business community to find new and good solutions. So that is almost like the living labs that Marvin talked about, but this is our answer to this with the business community. So right now we are collaborating with 5 companies that are testing solutions for better experience on our many islands there at the sea this summer for the people. This is a concept that we have developed from our collaboration with Helsinki through the Forum Virium. We are also hosting we are the hosting city of the Nordic Business Cluster, a cluster for Norwegian businesses within the smart city people. So, like Joachim talked about, the digital here is very important, and also in that the business opportunities that we carry on, we can set important stakeholders together to reach our goal.
Thank you. Thanks, Kari. We have a question for clarification from the chat. I'd like to bring this one to you, Pirjo. I think it was 50,000 apartments. My memory could be off. Paulo is asking, how many buildings did you say were included in the project that you talked about?
How many buildings? Around 2,000, if I remember correctly. But 50,000 apartments. Yeah.
Okay, so I got that part right. Thank you. Great.
Yeah.
Also, thanks, Pirjo. Also, would like to open the floor for your questions. So do put in your questions to our speakers in the chat, and we'll take them up as we go along. We're nearing the end of our panel, but still really want to get your questions and comments. While you're thinking and letting those brain cells work. I really want to ask a question to you, Eddie, looking at those processes for building those solutions. I mean, you talked about living in EU, you talked about the digital twins, but more importantly and more fundamentally, what is the role of data when you're creating those solutions? And can you also give us a bit of a teaser about these future common data spaces that you're discussing and you're looking at? How would those fit in building those solutions, please?
Yeah. So the common vision is to share those data between us, and then, as the Scottish would say, you can take the highway or the low way. And the highway in European Union terminology would be that I would invent with my colleagues a directive which says, in order to get there, you will write this standard, you will all share, and etc. etc. That's now we would probably get a 1.5 year discussion on the competencies of the European Union in urban policy. Once all of that is done, we will get a 2 to 3 year discussion between the experts on what the D1 standard that we will choose will look like. And by the time that is all finished, the European Union mayors will have bought sort of products not from the EU because it was handed to them by certain companies. Now, that's not the way we took. So we took the low way. Some people would reverse it emotionally, but I do this intentionally. We took the low way to actually say, like, no, there's 3 instruments that we have in the European Union: legislation, money, and convening power. So one way is what I just mentioned, the legislation. There are legislative elements in the data strategy that I mentioned, but the common data space is really about, do we not all see how important it for all of us it is individually? And we have a panel of public representatives, private representatives, to actually share the data. I mean, if anyone in the digital world knows that joining and sharing is the only way forward, by private sector, public sector, etc. We have certain requirements, for example, in the mobility for car manufacturers to share data on road safety. So you could have legislation. We said, no, let's go the convening way. Let's try to develop a vision of all the 80,000 mayors in Europe that would do something together with the European Commission directly. So you can see the ambition. It's not an easy way to get to that solution. And that is where this movement living.in.eu was born, where they said, no, let's politically commit to doing it in a certain way, with certain technical specifications, with monitoring. Let's do it in this way. Now, we now have 90 mayors that have signed this declaration, so we still have, 79,910 to go. So there's quite a few to go, but do it together. Build that sort of commonality in where we want to come, and thus create as a solution this data space and network of local digital twins. We as a European Union will put in some funding through the digital program, where we try to bring the governance there, some testing, some blueprints, toolboxes, the usual tools that the Commission brings forward. Obviously, any financing will need to come from the cities themselves, either with EU support for cohesion policy or the Recovery and Resilience Fund that people already refer to. But the purpose is really to build that vision together, and then with a number of tools that we would make available to the individual cities and municipalities to actually build that together. And then they will discover that it's been done in common. And I like Paul's question, where in one question he mentioned common and harmonization. And in a way, they don't necessarily go together. Harmonization is a sort of enforcement type of mechanism, whereas common is working from that common ideology, common vision, and common wish to find solutions. And that is what we have tried to do with that movement that we are building since the last 1.5 years.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Eddie. And you took the low road, pragmatic and functional again. I think that's great. So we're looking at sort of the different types. We discussed a few types of or ideas rather of solutions, or solutions that are already being implemented. Peter, you had the project that you mentioned. There's many that are also in the document that Joachim referred to. But asking a question to you, Peter, do you see sort of a typology of different solutions, different scales? And linked to that as well is, when you look at that typology of different solutions, what are some of the challenges and opportunities of those different types of solutions, and how do you create impact, please?
Yeah, Yeah, overall, I think there's like two kinds of solutions. There's those big system level solutions in energy. So what we do in the energy production, how we develop the energy system, for example, how we integrate the system with other sectors like buildings, mobility. So there are usually quite big solutions. For example, building new heat pump plant to utilize the excess heat from purified wastewater. And those maybe cannot be scaled up in that city. They are utilizing the local resource already, but of course they can be utilized in other cities, for example. But they are big solutions having rather big impact as such. And in there, you have to collaborate with stakeholders, partners, city quite heavily, and maybe not that much with consumers, with neighbors for sure. But then we have the other type of solutions, which are building level solutions or consumer level solutions, where they are more small solutions that need to be scaled up. We have to sell it, for example, to 500,000 people to have bigger impact. And those, of course, people won't buy the solution or use the solution if it's not good. So those we need to develop really closely with the customers so that they actually want to use the solution. They are easy to use. They create the impact they need. So collaboration is really crucial in both kind of solutions, but collaboration is rather different in a way.
Great, thank you, Kyria. I have a question here from Katarina. Thank you so much. Question: is there something we can learn from cities outside of Europe? I'll ask the panelists if anyone wants to come in and answer that, have a go at that question. But for the other participants, please do use the chat, ask your questions. We're nearing the end of our panel, but please ask your questions, provide us with your comments. We're talking really about how do we drive urban innovation systems, and how can we create these communities where solutions are being found for those challenges, those local challenges. Any perspective from our speakers? Is there something we can learn from cities outside Europe? We talked about, the title of the panel is The European Way, but something that we can learn from cities outside of Europe. Anyone wants to take a go at this?
To be honest, I think the answer is obviously yes. There's fantastic developments in many cities like Singapore, Dubai, all over the way in the United States, a number of cities where we can learn a lot technologically, the way they've done it, the way they've engineered it. At the same time, I would say that there's a lot of these things are fantastic. They look fantastic in the way they develop, but they may not be the cities that we would want to have as a European Union. And that's again where the European values come in. You can develop fantastic cities. I mean, when I discussed with the Chinese, we said, let's do something together. And then the day after they came for breakfast, they said, we have nominated this city as our city, which is yours. I said, what do you mean? I don't have a 10 million city in European Union. So there's a lot that we can learn, and we should be open to that and exchange with them. At the same time, our citizens are not living in Singapore. They're living somewhere else. They're living in their own environment, and they would like that the history and the culture and the values that they have brought with them over time are reflected in the solutions that we find European way. And that's where you get into optimum scale. You can globally do a lot of things together. Doesn't work. You can do it as a city alone. It doesn't work, or it's very costly. You try to find the optimum scale, and you won't be surprised that as a European Union official, I would say that the European Union is probably a good scale of bringing 450 million citizens around the same theme.
Great. Thank you, Eddie. Again, please do use the chat. Don't see any other questions coming in. So we do have a bit of time to go through a few other questions. Joachim, I'd like to bring this to you. I mean, we talked about a lot about these integrated solutions, about combining different benefits, climate, energy, social mobility. But how do we make solutions also inclusive? You mentioned earlier we need to be talking to older people, underrepresented groups. So from your perspective, what's the secret ingredient there to building those both integrated and those inclusive solutions? Any perspective from your side?
Yeah, I think the others have probably also a lot to say on this, but I mean, from my experience, I would say that it is important that we start with the people. And I mean, let's not talk about these groups, let's talk with these groups, and let's include them from the outset. I mean, just to give you an example, we had the European Green Week, as you can see in the background, last week with the most part of the events, and there's still lots of good partner events going on. And we had different sessions with different type of stakeholders and people who come from different backgrounds. I most enjoyed that we work with young people, with school children, and they bring a lot to the table, and they have a voice themselves. Let's not talk about our children who are underage. Let's ask them themselves, and they have lots of ideas, and they really. I mean, I was really impressed with. We had a little hackathon where they came up with wonderful solutions and ideas themselves. And so I think that's the starting point. And I think the importance is also about skills and education. I think that's what I want to say. Is that when we talk about smart solutions, we often talk about the technical side of things, and it's of course important. But I think it's the human side of things, the people side of things that we really have to invest in. That's part of our digital agenda, as you know. And Eddie can say probably more about it. But skills and education is absolutely essential to take people with us. I mean, I know it myself. I mean, I'm not a digital native in a sense that I start using these tools as they come along. I have to learn a lot, and I still probably am 10 years behind what is possible today. But I keep learning every day, and I think that's really a part of the whole inclusiveness agenda, is that we have to do it with everybody and have to take people along. And there can be different levels. Not everybody has to use the latest digital gadgets. You can use technologies that maybe have been around for a while, but that make people feel very comfortable in using them. And the mix is important. And maybe last point, it was very impressive what I learned from some experiences I had with Estonia, where the digital's chief officer, I think was called, explained that whilst they have all their administrative services now all online, they're all digital, and you can do it online. They still have office hours in the administrations because some people still like to come along and have a chat and have the social side of things. And that should still be possible. Digital does not mean that it's 100% digital. We have to allow for a diversity of ways of doing the same thing. And if people don't want to use the latest app that has been created by the municipality, there should be another way of doing it. And I think that I think can help get us together where we want to be. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Joachim. And Kari, I saw you smiling and nodding. So please, your comment. Please do come in.
Thank you. I think that what is being said now is very interesting and very important. That is to include the younger generation in this journey. So we have actually started, as we speak, a school in Stavanger of its own study with the university in co-creation, and that is the Smart City office has been a big contribution to that study, because that's a vital skill. Everybody has been saying something about it today, and we need that to develop the smarter city. Teach people, young people, to work together as equal partners when facing difficult problems that are too big for one player to tackle alone. And I think that is very important, and should maybe go even younger than university to train young people to find good solutions together and how they work with it. That is, I think, is very important and very interesting that being brought up now.
Brilliant, indeed. Thanks, Kari. And I think we're encroaching sort of a new territory. I mean, we talked about learning before, but those skills and education. How can we bring that into the fold in really building those solutions as well? Great. I think we're coming closer to the end of the panel. So what I'd want to do with the last few minutes is I'll just do a quick final round of all the speakers. We talked about a lot of different topics, but I'd like to get your final perspectives on what did you learn from this panel? What did you find the most important, your most important takeaway? And also, what are you going to do next in terms of next steps after this panel, based on what you learned? Perhaps I can bring in first Eddie to give us the wrap up, please.
Yeah, no, what I take is the togetherness on the themes that we are working on, from industry side, from the government side, at all levels, European Union, but also the national, regional, and local level. I think there is that element of togetherness. I don't think it is a contested thing. On details, yes, it is not. So what will I do next is really to build the movement, if you like, engage with the next set of mayors to discuss this, to bring that forward and convince them that by doing this together and not inventing your own solutions, you're actually much stronger, and you have the biggest tool that you maybe don't realize, and that is your public procurement. A lot of it is publicly procured, and it's an important tool that mayors have to steer in the right direction. So I would leave it at that.
Great, thank you, Eddie. Pirio, if I could ask you to come in, just give us your final reflection. What are you going to do after this panel, please?
Yeah. Thanks. It was really inspiring discussion. I think what was most insightful what Joachim said about the human side. So we need to engage users, we need to engage other stakeholders, but we shouldn't develop those services only to early adopters. But those who are not that familiarized with digital services, for example, so that they are accessible to all. So I think that's something I will think today when continuing developing the services.
Thanks, Piers. So how do we avoid that digital divide when we're building those digital solutions? But as you mentioned, Joachim, not all solutions are digital first. They all have a digital component. But just please, your final impressions from this panel to wrap up, please.
Yeah, thank you. A wonderful panel. I mean, I learned a lot. I mean, first of all, I know that I have 25 hours in Helsinki, and that's because the city works. Certainly will test it next time I'm there. I love the fact that Stavanger is no longer the oil capital of Norway, but becoming the green capital, it seems, and really love to learn more about the project. With Eddie, we're working closely together, and I think what is really the key for me that shows also in this panel, and I see in the whole marketplace, I really enjoyed the earlier session as well, is that we bring people together who are not usually speaking to each other, that we go out of our comfort zone, of our areas that we normally engage with our peers, where we know what we're talking about, we know the subjects and so on, and we talk across the bridge or the corridor with people who have to be part of the solutions that we want to create to have smart, climate neutral, green cities, because I think we all believe in this project and we have all our role to play, whether it's at the European level, national, local, and regional level. I think that's really great, and this panel was really inspiring. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Joachim. And last but not least, can I ask you, Kari, just to give us your final takeaways, please?
Thank you so much, Stefan, and thank you so much. It's been a very interesting session, and I think the importance of learning and doing mistakes, learning from others' mistakes, has been a big. It's been important to her. Listen to the people in the panel discuss, and I think it's important that we keep doing this, have the focus on all of the stakeholders, and just keep up the good work, because we have to create the good places for our inhabitants is so important, and to meet the climate change, and also in this we need the businesses with us. So I think that we are on the same team for the inhabitants. Thank you.
Thank you, Kari. And with that, we're coming to the end of our panel. I'd really like to thank all of our panelists for having this very interactive and inspiring discussion. Also, thank you to the audience for your comments on the challenges, the current challenges, but also some of those questions as well.